We're removing this ramp today. End of story. Karen's voice shattered the calm morning air. My hands were shaking. When I looked out the door, I saw a bright orange bulldozer in front of our house, and right in front of it stood my sister Emily in her wheelchair, ready to leave for work. Karen, the HOA president, was waving papers and barking orders at the workers. Neighbors were watching from their windows. But Karen had forgotten something crucial. Emily wasn't just any resident. She was the governor of this state. And this was about to become the biggest mistake of Karen's HOA career. Just a few days earlier, we'd received yet another neon yellow HOA violation notice taped to our front door. It was the 5th one that month. All of them were about Emily's wheelchair ramp. Yes, a ramp. My sister Emily had been in a car accident 6 months ago. Since then, she's been using a wheelchair. But that didn't stop her from getting elected governor and working tirelessly every single day. Our mornings are always the same. Emily gets up at 7 a.m., wheels herself down the ramp, and heads off to the state capitol with her security team. I work from home. But for the past few weeks, our routine has been constantly disrupted. Karen Thompson, the HOA president, has made it her personal mission to harass us over the ramp. That morning, as Emily left for work, I noticed Karen standing across the street with 2 men. She was pointing at the ramp and talking dramatically. One of them was taking notes, the other snapping photos. I had a bad feeling in my gut. But Emily just shook her head and said, "We followed every rule. Don't worry." And she was right. We'd done everything by the book. Licensed contractor, city permits, even matched the ramp's color to the exact shade of our house trim. But to Karen, the ramp was an eyesore. She claimed it ruined the neighborhood's aesthetic, and whenever there was an HOA meeting to discuss it, it was mysteriously scheduled during times Emily was out of town for work. That day, around 6:30 a.m., I was sipping my coffee when I heard the rumble of an engine. I ran to the window and froze. There was a bulldozer parked in our driveway. Karen stood next to it, red blazer on, hair perfectly done, and a thick file of papers in her hand. 2 more people from the HOA were with her. Emily was still asleep. I ran outside. "What is going on here?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. Karen turned with her trademark fake smile. "Oh good, you're up! Don't worry, this won't take long. Just a little HOA business. That ramp is violating several community guidelines." "That ramp is how my sister gets to work," I snapped, "and it's completely legal." Karen held up the papers like they were sacred. "Emergency order from the HOA board. Section 6, unauthorized external modifications can be removed immediately." "It's not unauthorized, it's city approved," I said, almost yelling. But Karen didn't care. She turned to the bulldozer operator and gave him a nod. Workers in orange vests started walking toward the ramp. And just then, Emily appeared in the doorway. She rolled up in her wheelchair, took one look at the scene, and said calmly but firmly, "You can't do this." Karen gave her a condescending smirk. "Rules apply to everyone, Emily. You don't get special treatment." Oh, how wrong she was. Because Emily wasn't just a regular citizen, she was the highest-ranking official in the entire state. But we had kept that private, until now. That was about to change. I rushed inside and grabbed every document, permit, and camera recording I had. I started filming immediately, launching a live stream. "Good morning, everyone. You're witnessing our HOA president, Karen Thompson, trying to demolish a city-approved, ADA-compliant wheelchair ramp." Neighbors began trickling out of their homes. Mr. Chen, Mrs. Rodriguez, even the reclusive Jenkins family. All of them were watching. Phones were out. Cameras were rolling. And then, a black SUV turned the corner, followed by another. Emily's security detail had arrived. Karen furrowed her brow, still unaware. The door to the SUV opened. Emily rolled out, wearing her official governor blazer and a look of unshakable authority. "Mrs. Thompson," she called out, "this is no longer a neighborhood issue. You violated federal disability law this morning." Karen's face fell. "I was just following HOA rules." "And I am the one who enforces state and federal law," Emily said, now fully in command. One of the agents stepped forward. "Ma'am, we'll need you to come with us. A federal investigation has been launched." Applause erupted from the crowd. Neighbors embraced each other. Karen, stunned, was escorted to a police car, still clutching her violation notices. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't about a ramp anymore. This was about standing up for justice, for dignity, and for every single person who had ever been bullied by someone like Karen. The morning after the ramp incident, the neighborhood didn't just wake up, it erupted. Satellite trucks were parked up and down our street. Reporters knocked on every door. The bulldozer was gone, but the damage it left behind was impossible to ignore. Not just on our driveway, but on the soul of the entire community. By 7 a.m., our house was surrounded. Not by law enforcement this time. By neighbors. Elderly residents with walkers. Parents with children. People we hadn't spoken to in years. And all of them were angry. Not just at Karen, but at themselves. For letting it get this far. Emily, ever the calm presence, wheeled herself out onto the front porch, wearing her navy blue blazer. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence alone quieted the crowd. "Thank you all for being here," she said. "But this is not just about me." I watched as she unfolded a stack of papers, official, stamped, state documents. She held them up, her voice unwavering. "This ramp," she said, gesturing to the broken remains beside her, "was built according to ADA regulations, with permits from the city, and with full transparency. And yet, it was destroyed by a group of people who claimed to be protecting this community." The silence was deafening. That's when Mr. Rodriguez stepped forward. The man barely left his house since his back surgery. But now, cane in hand, he stood tall. "I was fined $200 last year," he said, "for installing a lift for my son, a disabled veteran. Karen said it made the front of my house look industrial." His voice cracked. Emily reached out, touching his arm gently. "You are not alone, Mr. Rodriguez." That single gesture sparked something. Mrs. Chen, our quietest neighbor, always tending to her front yard garden, raised her hand. "Karen made me tear out my medicinal herbs," she said. "She said it wasn't aesthetically aligned. My husband has cancer. Those herbs helped with his nausea." Then the Baker family came forward, holding hands. Their youngest son, Noah, is on the autism spectrum. They'd installed a small sensory-friendly play structure in their backyard. Karen fined them 3 times, saying the colors were too bright. As each story came out, a pattern emerged. Targeted fines, intimidation, manipulation of HOA rules to bully those who didn't fit the image Karen had in her head. I looked around and saw what I hadn't noticed for years. A neighborhood held hostage by the very institution meant to protect it. Emily waited for them to finish, then held up one final document. "This," she said, "is an executive order. Effective immediately, a temporary injunction will freeze all HOA board actions until a full state audit can be completed. And yes, that includes Karen's presidency." Gasps echoed across the yard, but Emily wasn't finished. "I want to be very clear," she continued. "This is not about dismantling HOA systems. It's about restoring their purpose, community, fairness, and respect." It was the first time I'd seen Karen's porch completely dark. No flowers, no clipboard, no perfectly aligned lawn chairs, just silence. That afternoon, Emily met with a group of disability rights advocates on our front lawn. The pieces of the ramp still lay scattered on the grass, but instead of shame, there was solidarity. Kids chalked encouraging messages on the sidewalk. Teens offered to help rebuild. A local artist offered to paint a new design once it was done. But as positive as the mood was, the real storm was only beginning. That evening, my phone buzzed. It was Thomas, an old friend from college, now a civil rights lawyer. "You need to see this," he said. Attached were court records, 3 past lawsuits, all involving Karen Thompson. Different HOAs, same pattern. She'd been sued and quietly settled for the same behavior. Using HOA funds for personal gain, discriminatory enforcement, abuse of power. But she always escaped, moving on to another HOA, where no one knew her name yet. This time, we were going to stop her. Permanently. The next day, we turned our living room into command central. Emily's legal team set up laptops, printers, and whiteboards. Neighbors brought coffee, muffins, even their own old violation letters. Mr. Jenkins handed over a manila folder full of emails. Proof that Karen had never even been officially elected. The previous president had moved away, and Karen had simply stepped in and declared herself the authority. By noon, we had a timeline, a paper trail, a web of connections between Karen and several shady contractors she'd hired using HOA funds. But the most explosive discovery came from Mrs. Rodriguez, the quiet powerhouse of our street. She'd found an old email Karen accidentally forwarded, detailing how she planned to change the HOA bylaws to restrict renters and non-white families from moving in. Her words, "We need to maintain neighborhood purity." The room went dead silent. We knew then this wasn't just about ramps or gardens or paint colors. It was about something much darker. Emily looked around at all of us and said, "It's time for change." And we all nodded. Because Karen may have destroyed a ramp, but in doing so, she built something she never saw coming. A united community ready to fight back. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of hammering. At first, I thought it was a neighbor doing some repairs. But as I opened the blinds, my stomach dropped. There she was again. Karen, standing proudly in our front yard, clipboard in hand, pointing at the remains of the wheelchair ramp like it was a fallen enemy in battle. Two men in safety vests were placing orange cones around the debris, and someone had even set up a plastic construction site sign near the driveway. She was turning our home into a public display of HOA power. I rushed out the door, phone in hand, recording. "You can't be serious," I shouted, the rage bubbling inside me. "You're staging a demolition photo shoot now?" Karen turned to face me with that same nauseatingly smug smile. "Just documenting the cleanup process," she said sweetly. "You'll thank me later when your property value improves." "Cleanup," I repeated. "That was a legally constructed ramp. You bulldozed accessibility, Karen." She waved her clipboard like it was a royal decree. "The board approved the removal, and we followed our internal notice process. You should have attended the emergency vote." That vote, of course, had been held at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, when both Sarah and I were at work. Classic Karen move. But something else caught my attention this time. The construction workers looked nervous. One of them kept glancing over at me, then whispering to his partner. The other refused to make eye contact at all. As I walked back inside, I caught sight of Sarah's security detail discreetly stationed across the street, watching everything unfold. Her lead officer, Darnell, gave me a slight nod. I nodded back. Reinforcements were standing by. That afternoon, our mailbox overflowed with new HOA citations. 6, to be exact. One was for improperly stored medical equipment. Sarah's therapy chair on the back patio. Another for inappropriate yard art. A single ceramic turtle I'd had since college. And 4 others that were laughable in their reach, including unapproved outdoor lighting, because I had changed a bulb to a warmer hue. It was clear now. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was escalating a personal vendetta. By the time Sarah returned home from the Capitol, the rubble had been neatly pushed to one side, and a bright red tag now hung from our front door. She sat silently in her car, looking at what used to be her ramp, then slowly wheeled herself out. No words. Just a deep breath. The kind that hides fire underneath. "This isn't about the ramp anymore," she said quietly. "She's making a statement." I nodded. "Then let's make one louder." We began printing out every notice we'd received in the past 3 months. Sarah's assistant helped us collect digital records of every board meeting Karen had chaired, every vote she'd called without quorum, and every shady maintenance expense that led back to Karen's landscaping company. And then we found it. Buried in a PDF of scanned documents from 2021, a clause in the HOA's bylaws requiring any modification of a structure to be approved by both the board and the city, not just notified, approved. The demolition? Completely illegal. Karen had bulldozed state-approved infrastructure with nothing but a clipboard and ego. 641. We reached out to the state attorney general's office. Sarah made a few quiet calls. Within 24 hours, we had a legal team assigned to investigate potential civil rights violations. The case was growing bigger than Karen could imagine. Meanwhile, neighbors started talking. It started small. Mr. Rodriguez mentioned he'd been fined for putting a ramp in for his father, who was a war veteran. The Chen family showed us citations Karen had issued for their sensory-friendly backyard play area, designed for their autistic son. The Simons revealed they were fined for letting their elderly mother keep a wheelchair by the porch. Karen wasn't enforcing rules. She was systematically targeting accessibility. At the next HOA board meeting, which Karen had scheduled in the middle of the day as usual, something remarkable happened. Over 40 residents showed up. Sarah, in her governor's blazer, rolled to the front and calmly asked for the floor. Karen's jaw dropped when she realized the room wasn't filled with her usual yes men. It was filled with residents she'd harassed for years, each holding folders, printouts, and photos. Sarah held up a copy of the bulldozing permit, or lack thereof. This ramp was protected under both federal and state disability access laws, she said, her voice calm but forceful. Its destruction was not only cruel, it was criminal. Karen stood up, flustered. This is not the place for grandstanding. You're politicizing a neighborhood issue. Sarah smiled, cool and steady. It stopped being a neighborhood issue when you decided to take the law into your own hands. Then she passed the mic, literally. One by one, neighbors shared their stories. Every HOA violation Karen had used to suppress, shame, or isolate those with medical or physical needs was aired in front of everyone. When it was my turn, I walked to the front and projected Karen's surveillance photos on the big screen, the ones she'd taken at 6 a.m., crouched in our bushes, tape measure in hand. Does this look like leadership? I asked. Or does it look like harassment? The silence in the room said everything. By the time we ended the meeting, over 2/3 of the room had signed a petition for a full HOA audit and board re-election. Karen tried to argue the signatures weren't valid, but even her most loyal board members were backing away now. One of them, Mr. Wells, quietly resigned at the end of the meeting. As Sarah and I left the room that night, neighbors clapped us on the back, nodded respectfully, even apologized for not speaking up sooner. This wasn't just about a ramp anymore. This was about the soul of a community, and we were just getting started. The fallout from the bulldozer incident was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. Sarah may have stopped the demolition in time, but the ramp had already sustained enough damage that she could no longer safely use it. We'd set up a temporary access point using plywood and cinder blocks, but it wasn't ideal. Not for someone recovering from spinal surgery. I could see it in her eyes every time she rolled up or down it, the way her jaw tightened, how she winced with each bump. The night after Karen had been escorted off the property by state police, our doorbell rang again. This time, it wasn't news crews or neighbors offering casseroles. It was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled into a neat bun and a clipboard tucked under her arm. "Good evening," she said, holding out a badge. "My name is Cynthia Palmer. I'm with the State Office of Public Housing Accountability. I'm here to conduct an emergency audit of your homeowners association." Sarah raised an eyebrow but nodded, gesturing toward our living room. "You might want to sit down for this," she said. "You're going to need coffee." Within 15 minutes, Sarah and Cynthia were seated at the kitchen table with a stack of violation notices, HOA meeting transcripts, and a USB drive full of security camera footage. I stood back, quietly preparing tea, listening as Cynthia's pen scribbled across page after page. "What I've seen so far," she muttered, "is not just unethical, it's criminal." That night, Cynthia didn't leave until 1 a.m. She took boxes of documents with her, leaving us with a signed notice stating that the HOA was now under formal state investigation. Sarah posted the notice on our front door, right next to the crushed remnants of the original violation slip Karen had left behind. Over the next few days, the neighborhood atmosphere shifted from whispers to open rebellion. At first, it started with small things. People leaving their Christmas lights up, planting non-HOA-approved flowers, or parking a little crooked on their driveways. But then came the letters. One by one, homeowners started receiving apology notes, handwritten, from former HOA board members who had resigned in shame. They'd been bullied, coerced, and manipulated by Karen for years. One letter even mentioned that Karen had threatened to file false noise complaints if the board members didn't vote her way. And that's when Sarah had an idea. "If we're going to change this neighborhood," she said, wheeling herself to the community center bulletin board, "we need a clean slate." She posted a notice calling for an emergency town meeting. No official HOA approval. No Karen. Just the residents. The meeting room was overflowing before we even arrived. Families who had never spoken up before were standing shoulder to shoulder. Young couples, retirees, veterans, and even teenagers who had once been scolded by Karen for riding skateboards too close to her sidewalk. One of them had printed out flyers that said, "No more HOA bullies." Sarah took the mic, her voice clear and calm. "We came to this neighborhood for peace," she began. "For safety. For a sense of community. But what we got was a tyrant hiding behind bylaws." Applause broke out. She continued, revealing the findings from Cynthia Palmer's early audit. Over $30,000 of HOA funds went toward Karen's property enhancement projects. These include her new patio, landscaping upgrades, and even a trip to Hawaii she listed as community research. Gasps. Someone cursed under their breath. "And that bulldozer?" Sarah said, holding up a printed invoice. "Paid for by HOA emergency funds, without a vote." Suddenly, neighbors weren't just angry, they were ready to act. "I move to dissolve the current HOA board," shouted a woman from the back, "effective immediately." "I second that," yelled Mr. Rodriguez. "All in favor?" Sarah asked. A sea of hands shot into the air. With that, it was done. Karen was no longer the HOA president, not that she dared to show up to the meeting. And in her place, a temporary council was formed, consisting of volunteers voted in by the people. Sarah was unanimously elected to lead the transition team. "You're the only one we trust," someone said, and I couldn't agree more. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Contractors came to repair the ramp, this time for free, funded by donations from the very neighbors Karen had once fined into silence. A mural was painted on the side, featuring the words, "Access is freedom," surrounded by blooming flowers and stars. But the part that hit me the hardest came one evening when Mr. Jenkins, the same man who had once been fined for placing an American flag on his porch out of season, knocked on our door with tears in his eyes. "My grandson is autistic," he said. "Karen threatened to fine us over the sensory lights we installed. But now he feels safe here. Thank you." Sarah hugged him without hesitation. "I didn't do it alone," she said. "We did this together." Still, Karen hadn't disappeared. Word on the street was that she was meeting with lawyers, preparing to sue for defamation. But Sarah was ready. Our legal team had grown, bolstered by pro bono attorneys who believed this case could become the precedent for statewide HOA reform. And then came the email that would take everything to the next level. A national news outlet wanted to feature our neighborhood's transformation. Sarah looked at me after reading it. "We can't say no," she said. "There are people out there who are still suffering in silence. If we stay quiet now, nothing changes." So we said yes. As the camera crews began setting up in our front yard, I took one last look at the newly rebuilt ramp. It wasn't just concrete and railings anymore. It was a symbol, a declaration, a promise that what happened here would never happen again. Not under our watch. The courtroom was dead silent when the judge leaned forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, staring at Karen with stern eyes, "the evidence submitted against you is not only substantial, it's staggering." My sister Sarah and I sat side by side at the plaintiff's table, our documents neatly stacked in front of us. For the past 3 weeks, Sarah's legal team had worked around the clock to compile every HOA violation, financial discrepancy, and civil rights infraction Karen had committed over the years. But it wasn't just about us anymore. It was about everyone she had bullied. Sarah had made a promise to our neighbors, and to herself, that this case wouldn't end with just one ramp or one president. This was about setting a precedent. And now, as the trial entered its most critical phase, Karen Thompson was finally beginning to understand the full weight of her actions. Her attorney, An overly confident man in a pinstriped suit kept shuffling papers, clearly stalling. "Your Honor," he stammered, "we would like to file a motion to dismiss all charges regarding financial misconduct, as there is no concrete proof that—" "There are checks," I interrupted, standing up with permission. "Endorsed by Mrs. Thompson herself. HOA funds paid directly to a contracting company she owns." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Is this true, Mrs. Thompson?" Karen didn't speak. Her lips trembled slightly, but she said nothing. "She paid herself to pave her own driveway," I continued, handing the court clerk a copy of the transaction logs. "Listed under community maintenance expenses." The gallery erupted in whispers. Neighbors filled the benches. Some were people Karen had fined for planting garden gnomes or painting their front doors the wrong shade of beige. And now they were watching her squirm. Outside, media vans lined the street. Sarah's position as governor had turned this HOA scandal into a national story. Every night, cable news hosts recounted the saga of the ramp, the bulldozer, the takedown of a corrupt HOA president by a disabled woman who just wanted to live peacefully in her home. But we hadn't even gotten to the most explosive part. After the hearing adjourned for the day, I followed Sarah into the hallway, where her assistant handed her a sealed envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "An anonymous tip," Sarah said, opening it. Her eyes widened as she read. "It's from someone inside the HOA, a board member." Inside was a handwritten letter and a USB drive. The letter claimed that Karen had been manipulating votes on board resolutions for years, rigging elections, blocking residents she didn't like, and forging signatures. "This is enough for a full criminal investigation," Sarah muttered. We didn't waste time. That night, we met with the State Attorney General's office. They confirmed the authenticity of the documents and launched an immediate audit of Sunny Haven's HOA operations. Meanwhile, word spread like wildfire. Dozens of former residents came forward with their own stories. An elderly veteran said Karen had harassed him until he moved out, citing excessive flag displays. A single mother recounted how her daughter's wheelchair ramp had been denied approval. Twice. Sarah hosted a town hall meeting the next evening. Over 300 residents showed up. "This is more than one ramp," she said, her voice steady despite the fatigue in her eyes. "This is about reclaiming our neighborhoods from those who think power is a weapon." The crowd roared with applause. Many brought photos and documents of their own, and Sarah's team began compiling a class-action lawsuit. Karen, meanwhile, was falling apart. Her once loyal board members were resigning. Her legal defense fund had dried up. And now, investigators were combing through her bank accounts, searching for every cent misused. I returned home late that night to find a letter on our doorstep. It wasn't signed, but I recognized the handwriting. "Karen," it read, "you've destroyed everything I built. I hope you're proud." I looked around our yard. Neighbors had planted flowers where the old ramp had been. Kids played in the street. The community garden Sarah helped fund was thriving. Yes, I thought, I am proud. But we weren't done yet. The state flag fluttered gently outside the packed auditorium as neighbors, reporters, and state officials filed in. Inside, a hush fell over the room as Sarah wheeled herself onto the stage, dressed not in her usual governor's blazer, but in a simple navy sweater. She didn't need titles or podiums today. She had already won. "Before we begin," she said, looking out over the sea of familiar faces, "I want to remind everyone why we're here. Not for revenge, not for publicity, but because we were told to stay quiet, and we didn't." It had been 2 weeks since the final court hearing. Karen Thompson was officially found guilty of financial misconduct, abuse of power, and violating both state and federal housing laws. Her sentence: 6 months of house arrest, the loss of her board position, and full restitution to the community, nearly $300,000. But even more powerful than the legal victory was what came after. The neighborhood had changed. The HOA board was dissolved and restructured with a democratic vote. Sarah and I declined any leadership roles, insisting instead that local residents nominate fair, diverse representatives. Among those elected were Mr. Rodriguez, who once feared speaking up, and Mrs. Chen, whose medical garden had been destroyed under Karen's rule. Their first order of business? Rewriting the bylaws with community input and legal oversight. But it was what the children did that moved me most. They painted murals across the new, rebuilt wheelchair ramp, now named Freedom Walk by unanimous vote. Bright colors, words like respect, access, and dignity. One kid even drew a cartoon Karen being chased by a bulldozer, which made Sarah laugh for the first time in weeks. Despite everything, Sarah never gloated. Instead, she used the momentum to introduce legislation, the Community Fairness Act, that would place new checks on HOA powers across the state. It included mandatory financial transparency, fair elections, and protections for elderly and disabled residents. The bill passed unanimously. The governor from the neighboring state called it a blueprint for modern housing justice. We started getting emails from around the country. Veterans who'd lost their ramps. Families fined for harmless playsets. People who had suffered in silence for years. Inspired by Sarah's story, they were forming their own coalitions, organizing, speaking out. Our story had become something bigger than we imagined. Karen moved out of Sunny Haven 3 days after the verdict. Her home, stripped of its elaborate rose bushes and carefully painted shutters, was now empty. A for sale sign swung weakly in the wind. But we didn't celebrate her departure, we celebrated our growth. The new HOA sent welcome baskets instead of violation letters. They organized a weekend garden swap, helped a family rebuild their porch after storm damage, and even hosted a neighborhood movie night. No one missed the old rules, no one missed the fear. Sarah stood up from her chair on stage, her new physical therapy brace giving her just enough support to walk 3 steps unaided. The crowd burst into applause. "I'm not a hero," she said. "I'm a neighbor, just like all of you. I just wanted to get into my own house without being punished for needing a ramp." She paused, her eyes full of emotion. We showed the country what a neighborhood should be. As the event wrapped up, I stepped outside and looked down the street. Kids were riding bikes again. Someone was barbecuing. Mrs. Jenkins waved from her porch, now decorated however she pleased. A new family pulled into Karen's old driveway. The father got out first, then opened the door for his wife, and an elderly woman in a wheelchair. The ramp they'd installed was beautiful. 5 neighbors walked over immediately to help them unpack. It was poetic. The final letter from the state housing department arrived the next day, officially closing the investigation. Attached was a personal note. What started with one ramp became a movement. Thank you, I hung it on our fridge, next to the photo of Sarah smiling in front of the newly named Freedom Walk. That evening, we sat on the porch with lemonade and no fear. No letters, no fines, just peace. We didn't just defeat Karen. We rebuilt our home, our trust, and our community. And as the sun set over Sunny Haven, we knew this wasn't just the end of a story. It was the beginning of something far greater.